everyone, welcome to another NHD Quick Tip. This time we're going to be focusing on why you should include multiple perspectives in your NHD project. So first let's define what a perspective is. So a perspective is one point of view, one person's experience, or one side of the story. So usually when you do your NHD project, you do tend to focus in on one perspective. You can find the complete definition of multiple perspectives on page 8 in the 2020 NHD Contest Rulebook, which you can download at nhd.org/rules. So even though you tend to focus on a single perspective, that doesn't mean you shouldn't bring in multiple perspectives in your NHD project. So we're going to walk you through some tips on how to bring in multiple perspectives. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is that there are always different sides to a story, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 different sides. It really all depends on the people involved in that story. Remember, each person has a different perspective. So every time you gain more knowledge about the topic, you might find that there are multiple stories and multiple sides involved in your NHD topic. The way you can bring in multiple perspectives is to really make sure that you have a ton of different sources, right? So this means not only thinking about all of the different people involved, but going out to see what your sources are telling you and looking at the perspectives in those sources. And this involves doing a lot of wide research. For more information on wide research, check out the video on NHD tips that relates to wide research and why it's important in your NHD topic. Overall, keep in mind when you're doing your research, this is our NHD tip, you're the detective. Ask yourself who's involved. That's going to help you think about all of the different sides and all of the different people involved, and help you think about how that story may change based on the perspective that they have. So in order to show you this type of perspective, we've come up with an example topic, and we're going to focus on American and British perspectives on the Stamp Act.
The example we're looking at is the Stamp Act of 1765. So the Stamp Act, you'll see here, has 2 perspectives, the British perspective and the colonial perspective. Of course, these are not the only 2 perspectives on the Stamp Act of 1765, but these are the 2 that we're going to be focusing on for this example. So the Stamp Act of 1765 was an act of British Parliament that was imposed on the colonists in North America. And this was a tax on colonial papers, newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, and dice. Now, this was not the first tax imposed on colonists on North America, but this was a tax that was imposed on colonists that they did not know about in advance and were not consulted before this tax was made. So we can think, as a colonist, how would I feel about this tax? As a British person, how would I feel about this tax? So if we're looking at the British perspective, they needed to pay money after the 7 Years' War, so they had all this post-war debt, so they needed to get money somehow, and they also needed money because after the war they gained all of this additional land in North America, so they really needed money. So they attempted to raise money by taxing colonial newspapers, pamphlets, cards, almanacs, dice through the Stamp Act. And these types of taxes were common in England, so the British were simply asking the colonies to pay the price of their own admission into the British colonies and to pay for their own defense. Now, if we look at the colonial perspective of this Stamp Act, this was a direct tax that was imposed by the British government without their approval, so they didn't have any knowledge of it. Additionally, this tax was only payable in British sterling rather than the money that was in the colonies. So they had to get British sterling in order to pay these taxes. And this is also where we're getting that no taxation without representation. So that message of you can't tax us because we don't have any representation in British government as a colonist. So that's where we're looking at those 2 different perspectives of the Stamp Act of 1765. Now, of course, you can go out and find other perspectives in different sources, but these are just 2 examples of multiple perspectives on the same event.
Things get even more complicated when you bring in the loyalists who did not agree with the rest of their colonial brothers and sisters and thought that taxes were just fine because they were British subjects. So always keep in mind that multiple perspectives are involved in any one story, and you want to make sure that even if you're focusing on one perspective, you're still considering that other perspective as well.
Now, if you want to learn more about multiple perspectives, check out page 8 in the NHD Rulebook. You can go to nhd.org/rules to download download a copy. And you can also see how multiple perspectives will play into your category's evaluation sheet. So if you go to nhg.org/evals, you can download your category's evaluation sheet.